The purpose of this demonstration is to show you how to launch a projectile using the trebuchet. First thing you have to make is a counterweight holder. You just take a paper clip. You don't have to cut it, but you bend it in this fashion here, and you want to flare out the bottom so that it can hold a washer like this, and then just to figure out, develop a hypothesis, determine how many washers you want to put on this counterweight holder as a counterweight to the throwing arm. Put it on the throwing arm like this. Next thing you do is you want to get a projectile. Now it's up to you to determine the size of the projectile. These projectiles are made out of clay. The size of the projectile and the amount of weight on the counterweight is important to whether this thing is able to successfully launch a projectile. So I've got a fairly large projectile. I'm going to put it in the pouch, and you hook in one end of the pouch to the trigger pin, and you put the projectile in the pouch and use the trigger to hold the pouch in place while you're setting up the machine. So the key, there's a lot of variables that go into play to determine whether you have a successful launch. The size of the pouch is important. If the pouch is too small, then the projectile has a tendency to fall out. If it's too big, then the projectile won't come out at the right time. It'll stay in the pouch. Also, the size of the trigger pin, the length of it is important, and also the angle of the trigger pin. So sometimes you can have an angle. If you bend this up, that will determine when the one end of the sling is released, and that will the projectile cannot be released from the pouch unless the bottom of the sling is released from the trigger pin. So the angle of the trigger pin and the length is very important. Also, you need to put you need to ensure that the projectile is in the middle of the pouch. It stays in there as the throwing arm is coming up. So I'm going to put it in there like that. I'm going to make sure both of these sling lines are tight. They're not loose. And then once you're ready, you pull down on the trigger pin and you'll launch the projectile. And it went about, I'm guessing, about 10 feet. So probably even with a nice design and with some practice, you're still going to have some failures. A good ratio would be 3 successful launches to 1 failure. But it requires practice, and I'll try launching another one. I'm going to get a different size projectile. This one's a little smaller. I'm going to grade the distance that you launch a projectile and also your accuracy. So work on both of those, working on improving both of those areas. But the first thing you have to do is get a successful launch, and that may take some time. If you have trouble, some of the things you might adjust is the length of the sling, the length of the trigger pin, the angle of the trigger pin, the size of the pouch, the amount of weight you have on, and how taut these sling lines are. So let me try again. This one might not work. Okay, that one didn't go quite as far. But you guys get the general idea. The primary goal here is to do some problem solving, experiment, and try to come up with the best design, and then and we'll see how far you can throw the projectile. That's it.
Okay.